Good evening, everybody. It is 6:03 p.m. and I am calling this meeting of the Policy Committee to order. We are in the Nashua North Boardroom. Present tonight, we have Ms. Darling, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Oden, Mr. Posca, and Ms. Kinsella. Welcome, everybody. And so we will just dive right back in. The first item on our agenda is Policy 1120, which is Board Organization, BBB. And I'm going to do both of them kind of together. And Policy 1129, Caucus, which we had at the last full board meeting. And the full board requested it get sent back to policy for a little bit more work. And of course, I don't have those notes right in front of me because that would be convenient. So when we had met at the main board meeting, we had talked about how to allow us to have time to caucus and whether or not we're allowed to caucus before the inauguration. And I haven't heard back from the city attorney on that question. Ms. Kinsella, did you hear anything?
I have not heard.
I do know that the Board of Aldermen do caucus before inauguration. They caucus in December. And so certainly this is something that would affect us every other year. So we had initially talked about just getting rid of the caucus entirely as a policy. I don't have strong feelings either way, but I think, Ms. Johnson, you had some thoughts at the last board meeting, and so did you, Ms. Darling.
Excuse me, I think it was because neither one of us could make it. I was ill and a personal issue came up with Ms. Darling, so members of the committee didn't get a chance to speak and really hear what was going on and what yours and Ms. Bishop's reasoning was.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's why we asked to send it back, because neither one of us were able to attend the meeting.
All right, so we had talked about rescinding caucus because it's not something that we have done in recent history, and we were unsure whether or not we could actually do it before inauguration. The policy BBB, which is board organization, requires us to have our meeting to elect officers the very first business day, basically, after in January, which is the very first business day after inauguration, because we're always inaugurated that first Sunday in January, which makes the timeline very tight because the board doesn't have an opportunity to get together before that. The only change that we had made to board organization was to get rid of the time. It always said it had to be 7 o'clock on the first Monday, or Tuesday if Monday is a holiday. And we just said, you know, we've been moving, our meetings have started at 6 for the last 3 years. So it seems silly to have this one meeting be prescribed at 7, especially if it's going to be an extra long meeting. So that's really the only change to BBB. But we do need to decide on whether or not we want to continue with having caucus as part of the organizational meeting, which has been kind of our process the last, I would say, what, 7 or 8 years? And then, and get rid of policy 1129, or if we want to try and have a caucus prior to inauguration on those voting years.
I feel like the caucuses, as much as I want to be able to have caucuses where there's all the legal issues, I'm not sure that that's a possibility the way we're looking at it.
Right.
What is within our control and we could consider, and I've been looking up with other districts, is keeping the positions for the first set amount of time. Most of them seem to do their appointments in April. I don't know if that's a fiscal thing or what, but, and for a lot of them, either the president from the previous position or the clerk, if the president was available, would take the position. I would assume if neither one of those individuals were, then it could push for an earlier vote.
To run the meeting, you mean?
Yeah, to
Yeah.
do the organization, the president, clerk, and all that.
Yeah, so typically it's the clerk who does, the previous clerk does the organizational meeting. The other districts that are regional districts, et cetera, do their board offices in the spring because of town meeting day. So we're elected in November for a term beginning January 1st. They're elected in May? March? I think it's May. March? Okay, they're elected in March for terms beginning in April or May, I forget. I don't pay attention to when everybody else starts. But that's the difference in months.
I mean, I still, where a bunch of them had commented on just keeping the president, instead of just doing the organizational meeting, they would continue to run for the first month or two, let us get the new board members under their feet. And I gotta say, like, I watched as many meetings as I could during COVID and up to my election. And I thought I had everybody on this board pretty pegged, and personality-wise and thought-wise, and I thought I knew like what the people around me were looking for. It wasn't until I got elected that I started understanding the inner workings behind our policies, the laws that get in the way, stuff like that. And I feel like if a new individual had the time to get to really understand the other board members' working style, it would make it easier to vote on clerk, president, and have appointments like being the first voter. What does that mean? Kind of take a minute to understand the.
Right, right. Well, we do, our process has always been to choose our voting order out of a hat. So, you know, you get what you get and you don't get upset, is my, we used
Watch
to
me
tell
get
our kids
upset. It
when
just
we were
doesn't
little.
mean anything.
Because it just seems like the most fair way to do it. That way it changes every year. Like I said, I don't have any strong feelings. I'd just as soon get rid of the caucus, since we do a lot of that discussion in the organizational meeting. And if we get rid of the time, we could have the organizational meeting at, say, 5:30 or 5, and then the regular meeting start at 6, instead of trying to do an organizational meeting at 7 and then start the first meeting of the year for new people at 8.
So why don't we change the organizational meeting to February?
We can't.
Why not?
Hold on, I have to pull it up. I don't think there's a law regarding it, but because on voting years, election years, our positions expire on December 31st. So if, for example, the president or clerk or heads of the chairs of the various committees aren't reelected or retire or for whatever reason aren't there, then you don't have people to fill that role. And you'd have to take time that first meeting to elect someone to temporarily fill the role, so.
But I mean, most of the time, I feel like either the president or their clerk is probably still running, going, doing something. I just feel like.
The year I came onto the board, that wasn't the case,
I'll say, I know it definitely was the case this year.
so,
Yeah, that's because of the election 2 years prior,
yep.
because Ms. Raymond and I ran at the same time. So that's why they have it that you have 5 members on one election and 4 members on the other one. So you're changing over, and things on the board is constantly, it's not stale.
Right.
I mean, this board is never stale, let's put it that way. But I know when I was on the Board of Aldermen, what was nice was, prior to getting on the board after I was elected, you kind of went to meetings, caucuses, you know, you got to see the inner workings, they invited you, so you actually came in and, like I was part of meetings, almost. This is going back to 2002. But I remember we did have like sort of like a caucus, and it was good because you were learning what was coming up on the board. You knew you were meeting different board members, so you had an idea of who they were, their personalities. But I think it's hard to kind of change things because because you haven't been on that long, but you'll see in another year and a half, if people decide to run or not to run, how that can really pose a problem. Because you have to have, so let's say Ms. Bishop and Ms. Raymond decided not to run. Now, as of the 31st, as of January 1st, the board really doesn't exist, only for like emergencies, almost.
Until that first meeting.
Till that first meeting. So if a roof collapsed and nobody was sworn in, it would be the old board that would have to come in and make the decisions. So that's where the problem lies. So if you didn't have your president and vice president anymore, or clerk here, and they decide not to run, now what are you going to do? Because you've got the old board that two people at least, like, it would be like the two main people weren't there.
Right, and that's why they squished the inauguration is right away at the,
Right.
As soon as possible in January.
Would there be any way then for us to, once people are elected, before they're inaugurated, I mean, we have that like 2-month just dead period where I only celebrated for like a day, then I was bored. I wish that there was maybe a better way that we could include them to have them really see the inner workings of stuff, not just the sunshine and glory that we all have in our heads when we sign up.
Right, so, and it's interesting because we've talked about this. We did, Ms. Kinsella and I had changed a couple years ago to try and do an orientation in December instead of waiting until after people were inaugurated. But there are legal things that have to happen between the election day and inauguration day. And part of that is the criminal background checks and fingerprints and all that stuff because we are a school board and we're responsible for children. So we have that.
It's supposed to be fingerprinted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Perhaps.
Talk later.
And then, the other thing is how many things are out there, but we also are bound by FERPA and other federal privacy laws and state privacy laws. So until you've taken the oath of office, it's very important that we protect anything that could potentially be confidential as much as humanly possible. We don't want to, even though people have been elected and they're about to start their term, we have to be very careful to not have them, places where there might be student information.
Basically, you don't tell your attorney anything until you've paid the retainer. Been watching Inventing Anna. Highly recommend it.
So I guess we have two policies here. My suggestion.
May I just jump in and just say
Yes.
one more thing? I think the best thing, once you're elected, come into the committee meetings, come to the board meetings all the time, because although you can't be part of the conversation, you could be part of the conversation as the public.
Yep.
And to watch everything that's gone on. Because a lot of people don't realize when they run how much time this is. This is nothing compared to the Board of Aldermen with all their meetings. But this is still very time consuming, even with the fact that we don't have as many meetings as we did during COVID, with all that remote. But that's the best way. Once you get elected, become part of the audience and hear at all the committees. This way you know what the committees are. You see if you like the committees. You see the personalities that are going to be remaining on the board. And you kind of get an idea of, like, if one of them ran for president and clerk, which one would you want to work with? And that's the best way.
Agreed. And I would hope that people did that before even getting themselves on the ballot because, it's 2 nights a week, if not 3 most weeks. So it's a significant time commitment. Okay, so on policy 1120, BBB, that one's board organization. And again, the only change that we had suggested here was to eliminate the time where it was said it had to be at 7. A lot of the rest of it is based on the city charter. So I'm going to move that we go ahead and send BBB to the full board for approval as it's written here.
I'll second it.
Okay. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, and so that brings us to 1129, which is the caucus, so we've been kind of talking about both of them. The first part of the caucus one just references 1120, which we just updated, so that's no longer necessary, it's now a repeat. And then the rest of it is just talking about any caucusing has to happen in public session with appropriate notice to the public. But again, we haven't done this in forever, except as part of the organizational meeting. So my suggestion would be to rescind the policy since it's one that we're not using.
Can I ask a question of Ms. Oden? Did you used to do this a long time ago, caucusing?
I don't remember doing it ever,
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I just might not remember it,
you
but
got to get to the mic.
Yep.
I don't remember it happening in the past. It could have, but I don't remember it. And I'll go back to the early 90s. I don't remember that.
Do you remember it from your previous time?
I remember the Board of Aldermen, but that's about it.
Yeah. So my suggestion, I'll make the motion. I move that we recommend 1129 be rescinded.
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right, so this brings us to our biggie, which is meeting minutes. As we all know, this is policy BEDG. The law has recently changed at the state level regarding how we do our record keeping and what our requirements are. So the changes that you see here, it's a lot. It's a lot of crossouts and then changes, have to do with the legal updates so that what you see here in red is quite a bit from the New Hampshire School Board Association, and it makes sure that we have a policy that exactly follows what our legal requirements are. The other part of it that I think I just want to bring everyone's attention to, on page 1, under B, required content of minutes, number 3 is a brief description of each subject matter discussed. And I want to bring our attention to that because I think we haven't been doing as good of a job on that part as we needed to do. So I'm glad that we pulled this and have reviewed it. Ms. Kinsella and I talked about non-public meetings when we met to talk about this. And my non-public minutes, although we read them and we all agree that that's what we're writing down, need to be a little bit more girthy as well. So I will do a better job next time we go into non-public session. And I just remembered this. We have to schedule a special meeting every 6 months or so to review our non-public meetings and decide whether or not we're going to release those minutes or keep them sealed. So that has also been included in here to make sure that we're complying with the right to know law fully. And I would encourage everyone to, on the board, to take some time and read it to make sure that we're doing things properly.
I've got a question.
Yes.
On, let's see, C, approval and access to minutes. Number 5, drafts of non-public minutes will be provided to the board either at the conclusion of the non-public session and be approved at that time or prior to a sealed vote. We somewhat do it, but we don't know what exactly is written, so we haven't read it.
So no, so our process has been that I read it aloud because we have, the book. And so I read it aloud and I say, does everybody, agree with this? Does anyone have
Okay.
anything they want me to add or take away? And Ms. Kinsella has been kind enough to I'll just share it with you guys, to change our form for me by adding, it was only like 3 lines here for the minutes, and she's made it 3 times as long so that I can have a little bit more space to fill out the substance of the discussion. If you want to look at that.
You didn't add another page? Page 2, continued?
There is a page, there is another page on the back.
It's detailed, it's very detailed.
It's very detailed. And I was actually thinking I might get some just white lined paper
Yeah.
and put in here as well, so that there's blankers if I need more. Because I want to make sure that we, as it is, I think that our minutes, you can keep that if you want, Paula.
No,
Okay.
I'm good. I
think that our minutes are not specific enough to really warrant always keeping them sealed. So I feel like if we're going to go to the bother of sealing minutes, then there should be something in there that's meat and potatoes. You know what I mean? So,
I'm kind of like that. When you see me when I'm clerking,
Yep.
my committee, I keep writing and writing because I try to get every detail down, because I know now, especially when we didn't have the audio and the video, that one night, minutes then becomes your Bible, really, because that's the only thing you can come back on. So I want to ask Ms. Kinsella. So now, under the right to know law, the minimum is only a brief description. You don't have to have anything in full detail anymore.
You do not. So when Ms. Raymond and I met with Mr. Posca, we had discussed that, we had verbatim minutes at one point, and they would run anywhere, sometimes 36, 40 pages. So we don't have our BOE secretary anymore, and it's been brought into our office. So we are doing what the law requires by doing a brief synopsis. But I agree with Heather that we were not doing enough detail. So you might notice in the last maybe month or so, we are getting a little bit more in-depth. We're pulling some verbiage out, taking out all the tiny, tiny detail, summarizing, where JSSBC is my perfect example. I love those meetings. The minutes are super detailed, but you can kind of pare it down, and you can get a summary about what's going on at Franklin, in Pennachuck. So we have that information in there. So if you go to the minutes, you can see it, and then the motions just follow, and they make sense. So I've tried to do that with the rest of the policies. Heather does a really great job when she introduces every policy. So I take her wording and just take out personal pronouns and conversation type of pieces and try to put the reason that the policy is in front of the board for that day or the committee. So we're trying to put a little bit more detail in, but not verbatim. So hopefully we'll meet somewhere in the middle so that those minutes are a little bit more useful to everyone.
I hope so, because the biggest problem in the world is that when you have to go back and you have to watch the whole meeting and you got to stop it and you got to go back, it's a lot easier to be able to sit and read the minutes. I spent many days when my kids were in the doctor's office reading my packets, because back then we didn't have the cell phones like we do now, but it is a lot easier. That's why I say, for me to do it after a while on the computer, I go blind. But the more details we have, the easier it is for us to go back. If somebody asks us a question, rather than going back and trying to listen to the whole tape and saying to them, just listen to the tape, which they're not going to do, I can pull up the minutes and I can say, okay, I'm going to cut and paste what they're looking for.
Right.
I mean, I think it's a lot on the administration to have to do all this. I tried to get another board secretary, even just part-time, even if it's just for the full board meeting, because that's where everything really comes up sometimes and a lot of discussion with, but I was voted down on that, so, and two of us. But I think it's a lot to ask the administration to add on top of what you and Gabby does.
Yeah.
To do this, and I just wish we could get somebody to come in and be able to do these minutes, so it takes the pressure off
Right.
you.
Right, so I did grab a set of minutes one day, and I looked at it, and I thought, if I was just somebody looking at these minutes, what would they mean? Why was this motion made? Why was this motion made? Right. So there wasn't enough. So that's why we've started to put, like I said, a little bit more detail that tells you why that policy was brought to the board. What's the reason? Why is it sitting in committee? So hopefully, and I can certainly provide some examples or provide some of the updated minutes to you so you can see what we're doing. And
That'd be
hopefully-
great.
Okay,
That'd be great. Just, you could, if you want to do it on Friday when I pick up my packet,
be glad to.
that, if there is a packet for next week, if
There will be.
Yeah,
Oh,
there
there
will
will
be.
be.
Yeah, we got meetings
Who
next
would
week.
think? I think we have a full board meeting on Monday,
Yeah,
right?
we do.
Who would think that? All of a sudden it appears on us again. That'd be
So-
great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a question, and please, somebody stop me if this is redundant. Why haven't we invested in one of those translate programs where you play the audio and it translates? I mean, when I've met quadriplegics and vent-dependent quadriplegics who did all of their computers with just their mouths and speaking, and the technology is way beyond what it used to be. And the programs are pretty affordable, more affordable than a board secretary.
Yeah, they're definitely more affordable than a board secretary, but you still need a human being to go over and look at them, because when you are somebody who's training, when you are using adaptive programming like that, software, to do voice to texting, there's a training period. Well, it's actually adaptable. The computer
Yeah.
learns you, and you learn the computer, and you learn enunciation. But when it comes to these transcription softwares, because we have so many different voices in here and accents and inflections, it requires a human being to go listen to the thing and then go line by line and make all of the corrections.
I mean, I still feel like that would be less work than,
I don't know.
Then what?
We'd have to,
So we actually do run a software. It's a
Very
it's a-
cool.
It's a very low. I wouldn't say it's one of the most powerful, but it works. But it's funny how much it misses, and sometimes it's comical at what it does catch, because these are live all the time now. But it isn't 100%. You still have to go in and you have to refine. Sometimes
Okay.
there's words that here's half a word that Paula might say and half a word that Heather says, and it crosses over. So it
Yeah.
still takes a person to sit down. Now, I'm sure there are more expensive, better ones than we're running, but at least it gives us some of the detail, and that's what
Yeah.
I've been doing, Ms. Johnson, is grabbing some of that verbiage, modifying it, and putting a summary in, so.
and our own Miss Giglio does the minutes for Chelmsford School District. So I spoke with her and I checked out Chelmsford's minutes, and they're consistent with what this policy says and what the right to know says, as far as grabbing like a synopsis as opposed to word for word. And I don't know what people are using the minutes for, but for my purposes, I want to have a little bit of assistance with my memory, especially now that I'm the clerk, because when I was, just a board member, I took my own notes, and so I could write down what I wanted to remember later. But as clerk, I have to take down specific things, and I might miss noting some of the discussion, and that's the piece that I want for later, especially if something's unresolved or if I'm going back. Like Ms. Kinsella was talking about the JSSBC. It's been fascinating, those conversations about some of the construction stuff, and we were talking about plantings and our, cooperation with the Conservation Committee, and there was like a half-hour-long discussion about grass and various types of grasses. And that's not something that I don't necessarily need to know every single type of grass that was discussed, but it is nice to read the minutes and know that grasses were discussed, right? And that they're natural grasses, native, and all that stuff. So it's been interesting. The other point I wanted to make is that I believe that the district did look for a transcriptionist.
We did.
And we're not able to find anybody. Because it's
so
just
can we
a
amend
dying
the
skill.
policy that people can't work for the district? Because I will literally take that job tomorrow. We need minutes.
Well,
I need minutes. I'm a handicapped, I use the Control F so I can search through all of our packets.
Well, I would suggest that between now and Monday, take a look at the July, right?
July
The
policy.
July minutes.
Finance and
And
operations
August
and-
minutes.
yep.
And see if that is sufficient so that we can continue having this conversation and making sure that it is sufficient. But I did want to go ahead and update the policy and making sure that the policy follows the law and has that piece in there about having a description of the subject matter and the piece about the new requirements for reviewing sealed minutes, because that's something we haven't done yet this year, and we need to schedule.
When we met to talk about this policy, I think one of the first things we were talking about, making sure we were aligned with what the law states. And I think at this point, this policy does align with the law. The next step is, kind of personal preference. And I think, it seems that there was a long period of time where they were verbatim, seconds almost taken, and people got used to that. But yet this is about the minutes. And I think that's when both Ms. Kinsella and Ms. Raymond talked about the need to provide some more detail, and that's exactly the example that Ms. Raymond gave is regarding the grasses, about what's going forward. So
I think I was the only person who enjoyed that discussion.
But I think it also, it keeps us all honest, when we're approving these minutes, we do have the opportunity to kind of make the adjustments to the minutes based upon what we do here. So that is that opportunity for the board to come in and to put, additions or subtractions to those minutes as they see fit.
As long as we have to first be within the state law.
Yep.
And then we can make any modifications that we want, as long as it's within the law.
Yep.
The right to know law.
Yep. So I'm going to move that we send BEDG to the full board for approval, and so that we have a policy that is compliant at this point.
I'll second.
Okay. So all in favor of sending BEDG to the full board, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Then I got to scroll. It's a very long policy.
I keep trying to touch, thinking it's the iPad. It's not the iPad.
Oh,
It
that's
does
'cause you
not
have-
move.
I don't do well with the track, the tracky thing. I have to have a separate mouse.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next policy is currently GBEA. I'm suggesting that we change the letters to GBEBB, because as we looked up GBEA in the School Board Association's naming system, there's another policy by GBEA that is completely different, and I just want to be clear that this electronically communications between employees and students is not GBEA, which is something about like social media. So GBEBB is electronic communication between employees and students, and it came to the board's attention recently that we've had circumstances where text messages and group texts were used for communications about extracurricular activities and some other things, and I got the sense that the board was not comfortable with that, and that there's a lot of potential pitfalls in that type of unmonitored communication. So to protect our staff and our students, I suggest that we update this policy to make sure that the communications that our staff, including coaches, are having with our students and our families are using only district-approved methods. So in practicality, that means no more texting students on their personal cell phones, and instead allowing Mr. Pasca and Dr. Andrade and Ms. Gingras to figure out an application or a program that the district would use for those types of communications. I went to the North Sports Night last week because I have a child who runs cross country, and one of the cross country coaches is using Google Classroom for now, which I thought, great, that works. And so my child knows to go to the Google Classroom to look for changes to practices and et cetera. I don't know what all the other sports teams are doing, but I know that there's been a movement in that direction already. But I'd really like it enshrined in policy so that everybody has the same expectations and we don't have some coaches or staff continuing to utilize personal cell phones.
And I feel that that's wrong, because this way parents don't know what kind of communication is going between a member of the staff, whether it's coach or anybody. This way parents can see what's being said back and forth in the conversation, and I think that's the safest way to be. I just wanted on here, under the communication is accessible, and we're talking about the right to know, RSA 91A. Because this, I guess this is part of what I'm concerned with a little bit, because all electronic communication between staff and student is part of the district archives and subject to the right to know law, 91A.
It may not actually be subject to it, but it could be. Does
Well,
that make sense? Like, if it's a district to a, it depends on whether or not it violates FERPA.
I mean, this says all,
Yeah.
right, capital letters.
Knowing that this was coming before this policy subcommittee, Dr. Andrade asked us to start reaching out to building principals, directors, et cetera, to find out what is in place. So, you know, as we see here, when we met about this, we talked about not identifying the specific pathways in the policy, but yet all communications must be approved by a district-approved pathway. That is our next step, is
Yep.
to identify what those are. And to what Ms. Johnson is saying is, you know, she's very correct in the fact that we need to identify what those pathways, apps, whatever word you want to use, are being utilized, and make sure they are in tune with the right to know law, because that is important for us to know. So we are collecting this information right now, and we're hoping to have some more direction about what we will be utilizing going forward. And that just, again, it started possibly with some, you know, athletic pieces, but it also, because it is a district policy, it is going to transfer down to the schools and the classrooms and how we communicate with parents that way.
well, because on that paragraph, what I'm so concerned about, it says, "and/or may be accessible by others. Staff should not have an expectation of privacy with respect to these communications." So when we're talking about students, I mean, if anything gets leaked out,
Right.
and they're minors, so that's what I'm concerned about with that number 2.
I think it means that staff should never expect privacy when it comes to communications with students and like, and anyone who's reviewing the communication, like if one of the admins was saying, okay, is this appropriate or inappropriate?
Right.
The staff member can't sit there and say, my phone, no, you can't look.
Right, and I would say maybe if we added the word "may be subject to the right to know law," that way, so it would say all communication between student and staffs is part of the district archives, and then "and may be subject to the right to know law," because it may or may not, but it is subject to the district archives, and any communication that a staff member, an employee of the district has with a student in writing is now accessible to that employee's supervisor up to the superintendent, because we need to protect both our students and our staff.
Exactly, because we know the right to know law, what it says, how things are open to the public, and you don't want any of the students' conversations, if it was prior to the policy being adhered to and everything with the pathways on how we're
Yep.
going to make sure, you don't want their conversation public. So that's why I was really concerned with
Right.
this. So the word "may be subject to." So this way it puts that safeguard in there, that if there was a conversation with a minor,
Yep.
that we can't allow this to be open to the right to know law.
Right, but we do need to give people the, we need to put people on notice that any communications that they are having with our students are subject to review as part of their employment. You can't be texting kids on their personal cell phones outside of any kind of supervisory review.
Time to educate me again. Do we allow, or our kids are able to access social media in our schools? Like on our school computers or anything like that, or are they firewalled?
They are firewall
Yep,
protected.
not on district computers. However, students universally seem to have their own little pocket computers.
A million tricks around.
Right, and we do offer a guest Wi-Fi network for our students' use during class, because a lot of our classes do that, and they allow kids to go and read an article online, or do this online, or do that online. So we can't stop students from, during their e-block, accessing Facebook or Instagram or whatever the cool, I'm sure Facebook and Instagram aren't cool anymore, whatever the cool thing is
Probably
now
not,
these
they're
days.
old people now.
If you're on our network, those get blocked. Right. If you're using your personal minutes or
Data.
Cellular data.
then they have access.
So I guess my thought here is, we don't allow social media in school. I think we all can agree that social media, while is fun and entertaining, not the greatest thing for mental health, especially with students. And text messaging especially, I know the idea of a staff member feeling the need to text my child at any point, and granted, my children are much younger than high school, I could probably think this very differently in 3 to 4 years. I wish that we could, in this policy, have a line in about social media is never an acceptable form of communication or.
Yeah, we talked about that in the meeting. I know that many of the schools have Facebook pages for the school. There's a Nashua North Parents Facebook page, and one of the secretaries here posts things on there like, hey, don't forget free and reduced lunch forms, or don't forget it's picture day. It's not a back and forth communication. And I think that's used mostly by parents to access stuff. Elm Street has one, Birch Hill had one, Fairgrounds has one. But what I would like to see is Dr. Posca, Dr. Andrade, and Dr. Sarfty have to review and approve with Mr. Rodriguez and IT any programs that are being used to disseminate information to students. So I learned last week about a program called, did I write it down? Oh, maybe I didn't write it in this book. Anyways, I learned last week about a program that Hudson is using that has translation services in it. There's the Remind app. There's some other ones that teachers are already
Brightwheel
using.
with YMCA.
Yep, Brightwheel. So, but we want to have Mr. Rodriguez look at those and then have it go through an approval process, as opposed to just saying nothing. You know what I mean? Let IT and administration figure out what's appropriate and how the guidelines ought to be for that appropriate use. Something that has records, so, not Snapchat.
I mean, I definitely have very strong feelings about a policy like this. Like, to me, it's communicate with the parent, not the student. But
So my poor child was so embarrassed on sports night by me because, so there's multiple coaches for each sport, and one of the coaches was like, listen, in the past, we've had these texts. If you have my number, delete it, forget it, pretend it doesn't exist anymore. Do not contact me on my cell phone. And the other coach was like, yeah, we've always done it, blah, blah, blah. And afterwards, I was like, you're not doing it anymore. I'm sorry to pull rank, but here are my 18 reasons why I'm uncomfortable with that, and you do not have my permission to do this. And my poor kid was like, oh my God, like, can I hide from my mother and everyone around me?
But you know what, though? I appreciate you right now for validating my equally parental parentness.
Right, and honestly, I trust this coach completely. They're wonderful, absolutely wonderful coach, wonderful person. I have no reason to suspect anything untoward, and I've heard nothing but good things. So it's not the coach, it's the situation, and I think, and then also from putting the parent hat back on, group texts make me uncomfortable when they go from cell phone to cell phone to cell phone, especially if it is now an employee of the district who's sharing one child's contact with another child, because that's the unintended consequence of a group text. So if there were a bullying situation or a hazing situation, now that's become more accessible, and it's now accessible outside of school, which is out of the school's control. I feel like communications need to be within the control of the school. So, that's the other thing. And this is also to protect the staff. I don't want the staff to get in a situation where a student is being inappropriate towards them,
There's a great episode of Glee, if anyone wants to watch it, where the student gets a crush on the teacher, and it does show it from the other side. But I remember I had a huge crush on my English teacher, and thank God we didn't have texting back in that day, because I probably would have told him how cute he was and embarrassed myself to no end.
Yep.
But
I guess if I said this at my age, people would say that I'm old-fashioned. but I'm really not, because you have to look at the safety of our students. And adults shouldn't be contacting students. It's just not appropriate. It has to go through the legal methods within the district, because we don't need to set ourselves up for any type of lawsuits and parents being very upset, because if they do it to one, they do it to another. So I guess when I see the younger parents here, I don't feel that old.
Well, and I just want to point out, I absolutely trust Ms. Gingras, Mr. Posca, and Dr. Andrade to come back to the board if they find that there are reasons why we need to allow coaches, for example, to contact students, like maybe at away games, they need to have permission for this particular away game, to gather all the chicks together to get them back on the bus. I don't know. Because you got to get your ducks in a row to get them on the bus to go home. So I don't know. I don't have enough experience with those types of situations, but I completely trust that our coaches can communicate with the athletic director, who can communicate with central office, who can bring it back to us if they run into a situation where we need to make exceptions.
I think our athletic director does a very excellent job. I think she stays ahead of everything, and I think she will take this very serious to make sure that everybody understands what the policy is, and there's not going to be any gray areas here.
Yep.
So,
Great. All right, so on that note, I move that we send GDEB to the full board with the following change. On page 1, item number 2, under TAP, add the word maybe before subject to the right to know law. Does anyone want to second it?
I will. Sorry about that.
That's all right. All right. All in favor of sending this to the board, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And on this bent that I have gone on here, the next item is JICFA, which is hazing. The last year, coming out of COVID, we've had some behavioral issues that have popped up. And while I think that our staff has done an admirable job of handling them as they popped up, I felt like it was a good time, as we're reviewing the electronic communications, to also look at our hazing policies and making sure that they're clear, as concise as possible, and that it makes it very clear to all of our employees and our students and our student athletes that we don't tolerate this type of behavior, and gives them a pathway or a process of what to do if someone sees this type of behavior. So,
Is there a difference between hazing and bullying, other than hazing being part of an organized group?
well, hazing is actually defined in state law.
Oh,
So under RSA 631-7.
And this aligns with the NHSBA recommendations, so Ms. Raymond wanted us to be in line with that.
And hazing can be a crime, whereas bullying can be developmentally appropriate, although not a positive developmental thing, but it can be developmentally appropriate and something that you would deal with usually in-house through our behavior policy, JIC. But hazing can be a crime. It's extraordinarily serious, and we cannot allow it to happen. And when it does happen, if it does happen, we need to be immediately notifying administration, and then also probably law enforcement.
I completely agree with everything you're saying. Is there any value to adding the definition of hazing versus bullying so people do understand the severity? Or do enough people not read these to make it not really?
Yep, if you look at paragraph number 2, in the underlined, it has the definition
Oh,
very specifically from
I'm sorry.
the law. I don't like to.
from the strike through to the underlined confuses my brain.
I don't like to interpret what the law says. I like to just write down what the law says. I'll let the police and the lawyers do the interpreting, and I will send it over to them. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I know when I was on the board the first time, we started with the bullying policies from the state, and I would say, are you kidding me? Bullying? But as over the years, we've seen how horrible it has become, the bullying, to the point now that we're having hazing. And you know, when we had that little incident this year that went on, I believe, TikTok, was it on?
There have been a couple things, but yes.
Yes. You know, we say to our students, if you see something, say something. And they really did say something when they put it out there.
They did.
They did. But I think by putting it out there, really brought it to everybody's attention that this is going on, that even if you say it was going on, people would say, well, we haven't seen any proof. We saw the proof.
Right. I do wish that people had not put that kind of stuff out there on social media and TikTok because, to me, I'm always concerned about the privacy of the victim.
Yep.
And I feel like if you're the victim of a crime or harassment or assault, it's the victim's choice of how much of that they want to reveal publicly. You know what I mean? The victims shouldn't be outed because that just exacerbates the pressure on them. Having said that, telling was 100% the right thing to do, and it allowed our staff to do their job and the police to do their job, and it allowed people to take the next actions to protect kids. I just wish we had gotten to it prior to
it hitting. And I'm just hoping that anybody who knows of this or sees this does not put it out on the internet, brings it to the appropriate people, the police, their teacher, the school principal, and so then this way the victim isn't victimized anymore.
Exactly, that's the word I was going for, because they are. I mean, they shouldn't have to relive trauma all over the place. They should have a break from it.
But we, as a board now, know exactly how bad it has been. So now we have to correct this and make sure that we put a stop to it so there is no other victim again.
I agree completely.
Do you think this is going far enough?
I think that there's only so much that we can do in that we can enact our behavior code, JIC, up to and including suspension or even expulsion. And then there's a point where you have to let law enforcement do their job. You know what I mean? And we can't act as parents for kids. We have to let law enforcement do their job, and we have to let parents do their job. And so, to me, it's being protective, but also trying to stay in our lane a little bit. Having said that, we have a lot of community partnerships, and if parents or students need referrals or assistance, all of our guidance counselors and administrators can do that. We can absolutely help people get whatever supports that they need within the community, and more than happy to do that.
So we have a really good support system around our district.
We do, and we don't really talk about that in this policy because this policy is about consequences.
Right.
But there are supports as well. So I'm going to make a motion that we send JICFA hazing to the full board as amended here for approval.
I'll second.
Okay. I'm just using initials now for first and second, just so you know.
That's all I needed.
Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. I like how Mr. Posca is voting on all these as well.
I want to be part of the team.
It's helpful. Okay, the next policy is JICFA-R, which is, it's really a procedure, not a policy, but I liked the idea of keeping it in here simply to, so that we have something public that shows what happens when there is a report of hazing. And that's really it. It's just informative, in my opinion, to have it out there on our website as opposed to just a procedure that sits in a filing cabinet somewhere.
So do we have to have the JICFA where we have the JICFA-R? Like, can we have just the -R and combine them?
I don't think so, because JICFA says, here's the law on hazing, and our policy is that we don't allow it, and there will be consequences for it, essentially. JICFA-R says, if we receive information that there is hazing, here's how we handle it. Here are the steps.
This is the procedure.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So sometimes we include a procedure as a policy, like a policy attachment. That's what the -R
Yeah.
means. Sometimes we don't. In this case, I just thought it was helpful to have it out there.
So this way parents see that if anything happens, this is what the procedure is that we have to go by, and this is who gets them, how we investigate, and then if we bring the police in,
Yep.
they see.
And this really goes toward state law, which is under the education laws. So 306-04 talks about behavior management of students, and that also goes into our JIC policy regarding consequences for various types of behavior. But this is very clear. It also is very clear here, in case anyone's interested, way down at the bottom, it says corporal punishment is prohibited in Nashua District schools, which I took note of because I didn't realize that there are still states where corporal punishment is allowed in the schools. So this was something I learned this week. So now everyone else can know that too, but not here. We don't do that. So, does anyone have any questions? Oh, wait, did I go scroll too far? I think I scrolled too far. It's the other one that says that.
Wouldn't corporal punishment be,
I skipped ahead, it's my
but
fault.
wouldn't it be prohibited in all New Hampshire, not just Nashua?
No,
Or like,
no. But I skipped ahead to the next policy by accident. Sorry. So JICFA-R, do we have any other discussion on it?
No.
Okay. I move to send JICFA-R to the full board.
I'm going to second.
Thank you.
People know that I'm paying attention when they read the minutes.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, and then, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead with excitement, which was JLDBA. This is another one that we had pulled up as a result of our discussion that started about contact between staff and students electronically. The board kind of went off on a little tangent about anything having to do with student behavior and making sure our kids are safe and protected. This one also, I believe, was a request from the state to update it, or am I wrong?
I think it was just because it's 5 years and we were in that realm. so we
Oh, yes,
decided to
that's
bring it
right.
Forward and just do a,
Yep, I'm looking at my notes, that it is compliant with the current state law,
right.
which is 306-04.
I did have our Director of Special Ed, Marcia Bagley, review it, and she said it is in compliance with the law, and we are compliant with this this is what we're doing.
Okay.
So,
So the other part of this, I think, does this one have to do with CPI as well and restraints, or is that a whole nother policy? That's a whole nother policy, right?
yep, and that's coming in September.
That's coming in September, okay.
Did we do that one already? We did something close to it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That I questioned. Okay.
Yeah.
Laws on restraints are fun.
Yeah, I knew it was, I have all these lists going of all the policies that like I'm pulling to look at and when we're going to look at them, and I forget. Okay, so JLDBA, which is Behavior Management and Intervention, I move that we send that one to the board because we've reviewed it as per state law that we review it every 4 years.
I'll second.
Okay. But no changes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And now we are on to some financial ones. Policy DD, which is funding proposals, grants, and special projects. This policy was, how old is this policy? It's like 15 years old?
2007.
Yeah.
It was on my birthday, though.
So back 3 years ago, I want to say, 4 years ago? Wait, I'm looking at Ms. Oden. 5 years ago when they started the general assurances document. So it had to be 5 years ago. And we all had to read it. And it's basically this long 14, 15-page document that we get every year about this time. And it talks about all of our grant funding. All of the information about grant funding is now in that document that comes from the state every year. And our requirements regarding grant funding are now in policy DAF, which we just updated, I forget, last year or the year before. So we go over all of this as part of our budgeting process. We send it all through the finance committee. And then we also have the general assurances document that all board members are required to read every year, although we don't have to sign for it anymore that we read it. They changed that law. So based on all of that, my suggestion is that we go ahead and rescind DD because we've covered this in 4 separate places. And so this is now redundant. And I don't particularly want, speaking for myself, just a report on grants in addition to getting it in all those other places. It seems like busy work. So any discussion?
But I love trees, and that's a waste of trees.
Any discussion?
No.
All right, so I move that we rescind DD as it's, I'm going to write incorporated in other policies. Does anyone have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And that's all I have. I thought it would take longer. So the other items that I have coming up is as part of pulling hazing and electronic communications and other things, Mr. Posca and Mr. Chopa have on their to-do list to take a look at JIC, which is always a pleasure to look at. I don't know how long that internal review will take before it comes back to us, but it's on my list. I have a couple of old policies under facilities for Mr. Donovan and Mr. Smith to look at. We have JEC, Manifest Educational Hardship. There have been some changes to the law since that one was reviewed. So we are looking at the law and looking at the School Board Association, and that will be coming up. Change of school assignments, same thing. There have been some legal changes since the last time we looked at that one. I have a policy on auditing and accounting that are due for review. So we're asking Mr. Donovan to take a look at those. Let's see, the middle school education policy 2230 is very out of date and is part of the middle school project that is on my radar because as we're renovating and building these beautiful middle schools, we want to make sure that the way that we deliver education is also up to date. But I think that is going to continue to need some review through the steering committee and through, I don't even know who that's, I'm leaving that in Mr. Posca's hands, look at him. And then restraints, we're waiting on the Department of Education to give us those updates. And then there was one more. What was the other one that the School Board Association sent us? Not minutes. Governor Sununu just signed a new bill regarding public comments at meetings. I don't remember. I think it's BEDH. The law changed when he signed that bill to require 30 minutes of public comments at board meetings, school board meetings.
Does it need to be consecutive, or do we already meet the
It does
requirement?
not have to be consecutive. So we are already in compliance with the change because we did 15 and 15 at least, and sometimes we go way over that. And sometimes not a lot of people show up, but we have it on our agenda available. But we do need to update that policy to comply with the law. So even though our practice is in compliance, we will have to update the policy. And I think we just updated that policy like 2 months ago. So we will have to put that tiny change in there.
I have a question.
Yep.
And we had an email from a parent talking about students coming into the system, being able to have activities or something.
Yep, so that policy was updated in 2021, to
Okay.
comply with the legal change that she's talking about.
Okay.
And so homeschool students are eligible and welcome to participate in any activities that we offer here in the public school system.
Has anybody answered this parent? Because I know the email came
I think
in.
I did.
Okay, could you just double check?
Yeah.
I would appreciate it because, and I had the email, and of course, I don't have it here, so that's why I was just kind of looking like questionable.
So yeah, so it's actually not uncommon for our homeschool students
Right.
to come in and participate in extracurricular sports and activities. The other thing that is less common, but I have seen in a number of the elementary schools, maybe it's a secret, I don't know, is students who are homeschooled but might attend their local elementary school for their unified arts classes.
Yeah, very common.
So that's very common, and people should know that that's available to them as well. So if you have a homeschool student, but they want to participate in band in fifth grade, is it fourth and fifth? Fourth and fifth grade, that is also very welcome, and we are 100% okay with those types of things, or music, or art, or whatever it is.
So let me ask a question on this. How do we get this out to the community so they know this, especially the homeschool parents? Because if laws changed and they were, like, they've come in for the activities now, and the parent is sending us this information because the law changed again, how are we getting it out to the homeschool parents?
I feel like that would be
Do we
the social workers.
I don't even know, do we even have a list of homeschool parents? Like in other states?
We're supposed to keep track of them.
We have them, yeah.
Yeah.
We have, it's been our practice, I've been in the district for 21 years, we have always let kids in. We've let kids in to do the sports, even if they went to a charter school or a private school, and they wanted to play on the public school team, they were allowed to do that. We've always let kids in for home ec or FACS, band and everything in the middle school, so.
And I believe a
guess-
lot of the homeschool network and support groups kind of share that out with their families who are part of that homeschool network.
Obviously, this mother didn't know about it, so I'm just wondering, I
Now,
mean,
I didn't get the email, as per usual. So I'm not sure exactly about how this parent may have worded things, but I wonder if when they reached out, it maybe should have been worded more as a question of, I'm trying to find out information because I'm homeschooling, and a little less of demanding style. Once again, I haven't read the
No.
email.
demanding,
I didn't find the tone of the email to
no.
be
All right.
anything except seeking information, and like FYI, and how do we do this? But it was before I went on vacation, so it was June or early July. I'm fairly certain I responded, but I will double check in my sent items, and if not, I'll make sure that I follow
it's
up
just
with
that
her.
I had copied it in
Yep.
the last, and I was bringing it to the policy committee meeting in July.
Yep.
But where I didn't come because I was sick,
Yep.
I didn't bring it up, and then I had put it out, so I bring it tonight, and of course, I don't know where it's sitting.
Yep. No, but I
Sitting
remember.
with some papers.
Yeah, no, Ms. Kinsella and I spoke about it, and we looked it up on the website, and we made sure that everything was up to date on it, because it was an important question, and I want to make sure that we are being up to date on legal changes as they occur, whenever possible. I don't want to wait, and be playing catch-up as we're doing on some of these really old policies. There was a period of time when the board wasn't doing as good of a job with reviewing older policies, and really instead focusing on new ones. And so with Mr. Posca's cooperation and Ms. Kinsella's cooperation, we've been pulling some of those oldest ones and just, looking it up and looking up the laws, and it's talking to the School Boards Association lawyers and making sure that we are getting things where they need to be. And thankfully, a lot of times we're finding that our practice is good, even if the
Policy
policy
might not be, right.
doesn't say, because our policies are like, this is the minimum standard for behavior, and then our practice tends to be a little bit better in most cases. But when we looked at the minutes policy, we discovered that we have work to do there.
A lot of work, and I have to thank you all for doing it.
Yeah.
It really is a lot of work.
So, no, I think it's worthwhile to take a look at these things and make sure, because we want to make sure that we're compliant. That's our responsibility on the board, so our obligation. All right, that is all I have. If anybody has other items that they want the policy committee to look at, just email me or Ms. Kinsella or Mr. Posca, and I'll put it on my list. I have a notebook. I've got lists going, and every month poor Mr. Posca has to listen to me go over the whole list and be like, where are we on this? And but I'm trying to think out 1 or 2 months at a time so that when things need to be reviewed by individuals within administration, we can get it to them in a timely manner. I don't want to be sending out something to special ed right as school's starting
Right.
that needs to be back to me in a week. It's just not, it's not respectful of her time.
Can we pull any policies related to high schoolers paying for their bus passes?
Is that a policy or a procedure? I'll look into it.
I would appreciate that, either way.
I
want it
do know
changed.
that if students receive free or reduced lunch, they do not have to pay for bus passes, but they do have to fill out that free or reduced lunch paperwork.
I just think it's best practice to offer transportation to and from public education for free, especially where Dan Donovan had already said when we were in budget that, it's not such a high revenue that losing it is going to damage anything. In fact, we could, honestly, if we wanted to recoup the money, we could go so far as to raise our driver's ed class. It's currently 500, which is 200 less than anyone else in the state. We could easily raise that to 600. Parents are still going to pay because they want their kids to be able to drive, and that's more than a bus pass. But buses are safer transportation anyway, and more environmentally friendly.
All right, so I put that on my list, and Mr. Posca and I will talk about it with Mr. Donovan probably and Dr. Andrade.
I appreciate it.
And we'll put it in the queue. Anything else? I have to pay my sons, actually. And also put money on his lunch account, which I don't know that anybody watches policy because we're like the most boring committee, but free and reduced, free lunch, breakfast and lunch is over. That was a federal program. It has ended. As of now, the end of summer school, we no longer have it. So we need people to be signing up for our lunch program online, putting money into their students' accounts, or filling out that free and reduced lunch paperwork so that students can get lunch and breakfast at school and be in a place of learn readiness.
Verification question that we might want to bring up on Monday. If you have more than one child in the district, do you have to fill it out for every child or only one? Because I have now heard it both ways, and I've now filled it out 3 times this year.
I don't know. We can ask.
We should ask.
Dahlia, what's her last name?
Daigle.
Daigle. We can ask Ms. Daigle at Food Services.
Did everybody, they don't have to fill this out till the beginning of school, or are they filling it out now online?
So you can go online and fill it out at any time. And then the elementary schools send it home in the first day paperwork. So parents who have an elementary schooler know that they get this big folder of paperwork.
that.
It takes you like 40, and the kids come home and they're like, you have homework, Mom. And, it's exciting.
Smart one.
Well, the only reason I was asking that, I don't mean to interrupt, is that if they only have to fill it out once,
Get it done.
a note should be, some type of notification should be on there. If you have more than one student in the school, we only need you to fill out this paperwork once.
Yep. I don't
Or
know.
online, if,
Right. What do the middle schools do? Do they send it home in paper? The high school sent out an email this week inviting people, welcome back to school, and here's your contact paperwork that you need to fill
We were just
out.
offered that too, the middle school.
That's my anticipation of what the middle schools will do. When I was the middle school principal, we were in COVID, so we were
Right.
in the free piece of it. So I wasn't the principal here in Nashua when we were doing the lunch.
Pre-COVID, yeah. And I don't remember. Let's be honest, I don't remember what we did when my son
but
was in
if
sixth grade.
if you only need to fill it out even online, there should be like a little notification that
For
if
all
you
your
have more
children.
than one student in school, you're only required to fill this out once, and probably just put the name of the other student, and that's it.
Yep, and I do know that the paperwork is available in multiple languages as well. So, and that's another question, actually, which is, will that paperwork be available on Nashua Goes Back to School next week? Because we have the Nashua Goes Back to School night where people can go and meet their principals, and they each have like a
August
table and stuff.
25th.
I wonder if we have that paperwork available for parents to pick up then as well.
Thursday.
We should. I know Dr. Crisp just did a kindergarten event, or no, it was a whole elementary school where you could go in either one day or the other day.
Meet, yeah.
And yeah, they had all the paperwork out, and in order to get one of the backpacks and supplies, you had to fill out the paperwork.
Yep.
Which is genius.
Yep.
And I gotta say, like, this is the earliest I've ever gotten that paperwork done. School hasn't even started yet. My homework night's gonna be so easy this year.
Yeah, it gets easier every year, especially once you've filled it out a few times and they just know.
Yeah.
So,
I don't miss those days.
I'll give you a copy
You would
of
not
one of mine, and you
believe-
can help me fill them out.
our
come over.
calendar.
I'll
All
bring
right, so
bananas
let's be respectful of Ms. Kinsella and Mr. Posca, who have been working all day. I'm sure you guys are starving. If there's nothing else, then I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
So all in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And so we are adjourned at 7:19.